Welcome to Blue Texas Live, hosted by Rant Media. I'm Matthew Reyna. I'm here today with James Talarico, who's running for Texas House and Texas House District 52. James, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Before we get started here, I did want to say Rant Media is hosting an event, the Texas House District 64 Democratic Debate at North Central Texas College. If you're in the Denton area, come hang out with us. It's going to be fun. So, just to get started here, this is a district that Texas Democrats, some elections they haven't contested, and in the years they have contested it, it hasn't been competitive. This seems like a district to me that could be competitive. Why haven't Democrats been running here, and why did you decide to run this year?
Yeah, so House District 52 is located just north of Austin, in Round Rock, Hutto, Taylor, a little bit of Georgetown. It's a fast-changing district, so it's historically been right-leaning. It's historically been mostly rural. As Austin has grown, folks are being priced out of the city and are being pushed into our neck of the woods. So the demographics have changed, the economics have changed, and with that, the politics have also changed. And so that started about 10 years ago when a Democrat won this seat in 2008. Her name was Deanna Maldonado. She's a good friend of mine, really good on education issues. She was actually president of the school board here in Round Rock, and that's how I got to know her. So she won the district in 2008, and then of course lost it in the kind of Tea Party wave of 2010. And then the seat's been held by Representative Larry Gonzalez, who's a Republican, and he's a friend of mine and really a smart, pragmatic, good-hearted servant leader. And we're in different parties, but I think that Larry was one of the folks who could really work across the aisle, and that's why he held on to the seat for so long. And honestly, I think he didn't have much Democratic opposition because a lot of us thought that although he was a Republican, he was a Republican who could work with Democrats and who had the best interests of the state at the forefront. So now I think with him leaving, Larry Gonzalez is retiring. This is an open seat, and I think we don't want this seat to now be taken by an extremist on either side. We want someone to take his spot who can work across the aisle, bring people together, and move our state forward.
And your opponent in this election will be Cynthia Flores.
Yeah.
How do you assess your vision for HD 52
Sure.
Versus hers?
Yeah, so House District 52 is, like we just said, a winnable district. It's a purple district, a swing district, but more importantly, it's my home. This is where I grew up. I was born at Round Rock Hospital, which is on the other side of the district. I went to McNeil High School, which is in the district. My aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents all live here, all my classmates, all my friends. So this is really my home. So I really want to create a House District 52 community that believes in strong public schools, affordable health care, local control, and really, is creating an inclusive community where we can all get ahead together. And so that's the message that we've been kind of putting forth on the campaign trail, and I think it's resonating with Democrats. It's also resonating with independents and some Republicans who are kind of tired of the extremism that's taken over their party in recent years. And so the people are looking for someone who can really put people over party or politics or partisanship and work to get things done.
Certainly, and in that answer you did mention public education.
Yeah.
And I know that's the number one issue on your campaign website, fixing the school finance system. Mm-hmm. What do you think is wrong with it, and what can we do in the next session to fix it?
Yeah, so your listeners may know a little bit about state legislatures or the Texas legislature, but the most important job of the state government here in Texas is stewarding our public education system. Over half of the state's budget goes to education. That's K through 12 and higher education. So it's by far kind of the biggest driver of state spending and state policy. And so, I grew up in the public schools here. I'm from kindergarten through 12th grade. I went to a public university called UT Austin, just down the road. And then I got my master's in education policy. And then I served as a public school teacher. So I was a middle school teacher for several years. And I got to see firsthand kind of the untapped potential of our public education system in Texas. And so you alluded to school finance, which I think is the biggest problem we face as a state in terms of education policy. And so for the longest time, the state government and local municipalities, local governments, state school districts were about equal in the amount of money they put into our public schools. what's happened over the last couple of decades under the current kind of far-right Republican rule is that the state's share of spending for our schools has dropped pretty dramatically. They used to be about half, now they're a third, less than a third of our state's spending on our total spending on public education. And so the effect of that is that our local school districts are left kind of carrying the bag, right? And local taxpayers are left with the tab that our state hasn't paid. And so what happens is that local districts are forced to raise property taxes to make up the difference, right? Because our local leaders, our local neighborhoods, we believe in our schools. We're responsible. We're not going to punish our kids because our state leaders don't believe in education, and so we make up the difference. And so that means that local property taxes have risen really significantly over the past couple of years, pricing out a lot of people from their homes, making it unaffordable to live in places like Round Rock and Hutto and Taylor. So what we need are education-focused candidates on both sides of the aisle who can go to the Capitol in Austin and who can advocate for the state paying their fair share of education spending. And if we do that, we can relieve local taxpayers, we can support our teachers and our schools, and we can get every kid the shot they deserve to having a successful future.
And in that answer, you kind of alluded to the far-right influence in our government
Sure.
right now in terms of what's happening in public education.
Sure.
I think the argument on the other side, people like Dan Patrick or Empower Texans would make is that they're not against public education. They just want to advocate for more school choice. What would you say to that argument?
So I would say those are not mutually exclusive choices, right? It's kind of a red herring, right? I think you can advocate for innovation in our education system. You can advocate for improving public education as a whole and changing the way we do things and improving curriculum and early childhood and technology in the classroom. All things that I think are great avenues to explore. But I don't understand why that means you have to cut funding to our schools. So in some ways, I think it's a distraction from the real issue, which is that some of our extreme, far-right leaders in our state, like Lieutenant Governor Patrick, are systematically defunding this system so that they can push a radical agenda of privatization that really most Texans on both sides of the aisle don't want any part of.
And just to follow up on that, and that is something I think is unpopular, and I think within that, some in the Texas GOP run issues like the bathroom bill or the sanctuary cities bill. So I just want to talk to you, what do you think about what happened in the last session where we saw kind of all that more mean-spirited legislation being run through the legislature?
I think mean-spirited is such a good way to describe it because, as a native Texan, I know you're from here as well. This is the friendly state. Friendship is literally the motto of the state. And we've always been known for our hospitality, for being big-hearted. When one of the worst hurricanes in recent memory, Hurricane Katrina, back in 2005, hit the city of New Orleans, the city of Houston opened the doors and let thousands of citizens of New Orleans find refuge in our city. You saw it with a hurricane last year with Hurricane Harvey, where our state came together to help our neighbors when they were in need. So Texans are known for being hospitable, for being welcoming, big-hearted. And the current leadership we have in the state just don't understand that, which makes sense because Dan Patrick is from Maryland. He's not from Texas. No offense to folks in Maryland. And so we've got to get back to that heritage that we're so proud of. And I hope in the next session we can avoid really divisive, radical issues like discriminating against transgender children, discriminating against hardworking immigrant families. And we can focus on the things that people really care about, which is improving public education, making college more affordable, improving our infrastructure so people can get to work without sitting in traffic for hours. We have to get back to the meat and potato issues that people really care about. I'm one of these believers, like Bob Bullock, that the state government or any government should only do a few things, but they should do those things really well. And education, higher education, infrastructure, healthcare are those things. And right now we're falling down on the job.
So if you are elected in November, day one, your first day in the legislature, what are some of the priorities? What are the first things you're looking at?
Yeah, so we've already talked about public education and healthcare and infrastructure. Democrats are not in the majority in Texas yet. I'm hoping one day we will. But I think even the most optimistic forecasts don't predict us taking the House back. So in many ways, we'll be playing defense and hopefully building a coalition with our pragmatic Republican counterparts against the extremism on their side of the aisle. And in Texas right now, the Speaker of the House, Joe Straus, a Republican, who I admire greatly, and who stood up to his own party to protect trans kids back in the last session, is retiring. So that means the first few days of the House are actually not going to be policy focused. They're going to be focused on the race for Speaker. And I can tell you personally, there are a lot of pledges going around where politicians are signing pledges saying, I'm going to vote for my party's choice, or I'm going to vote for someone who meets this criteria. I'm going to vote for the person who best represents this district, whether it's a Democrat, whether it's a Republican, whether it's a Libertarian, whether it's an Independent, whoever represents the interests of this district best, I'm going to vote for that person. The other folks running for this office have signed other pledges, kind of handing over that responsibility to some other authority, and I just won't do that. So first priority is going to be picking a speaker who is best for this district and who's best for the state of Texas.
And now you mentioned that, even by the most optimistic projections, Democrats probably aren't going to take the House back. But if there is this blue wave we hear about, and the House looks something like 80 to 70 R to D, what is there going to be room this session? Last session wasn't a bipartisan session. There's been a lot of backlash against it. Do you think in the next session there's going to be more room for bipartisanship?
I hope so. Everyone's talking about blue wave, and I'm a proud Democrat. I love my party. I've been active in my party since I was a fourth grader. But I really hope it's not just a blue wave. I hope it's like a decency wave. I hope it's a common sense wave. Like it's people from both parties who are being elected who really want to work together and solve problems. And if that's true, then we can have more bipartisanship in the next session. Because I'm a believer. I believe really in democratic institutions. The person in the Oval Office has done his best to undermine our democracy in many ways. And I think really we need two functioning political parties. Even though I'm a member of the Democratic Party, I think we need two parties that are functioning. Right now we only have one party that's functioning, and the other is not. And that's really dangerous for democracy. So I really hope we elect a lot of Democrats and good, pragmatic progressives. And then I hope we also elect some pragmatic conservatives who actually want to work with us to solve real problems and not focus on discriminating against trans kids or hurting immigrant families.
And that's very interesting because, as you remember, the governor, he campaigned against three more pragmatic Republicans, and two of those Republicans, Lyle Larson and Sarah Davis in Houston, won their races.
That's right.
So maybe we are seeing that wave.
I hope so. I really hope the election of President Trump, I think, was disturbing to so many of us, not because red team versus blue team, but because he's so blatantly disregarded so many of the values and the norms that we've kind of cherished in this country for our entire history. And so that should be a wake-up call to everybody, not just members of the Democratic Party. We all need to kind of come back to our senses, realize what we have in common, see our shared humanity, and really try to change the way we do politics in Texas and across the country.
Definitely. And also on your website, you do mention higher education. I think the role of a state representative, in my mind, I thought it was a bit limited in what you can do in terms of lowering tuition costs. But what can you do in terms of easing that debt burden?
So this is one of the issues I'm most passionate about. When I was an undergrad at the University of Texas, they were trying to raise tuition at our institution and at other higher education institutions across Texas. And so I started with a bunch of other student leaders a movement called Tuition Relief Now. So this was 2009. This was before Bernie Sanders. This is before everybody was really waking up to the issue of unaffordable higher education. And we pushed both our university and our legislators, which is where the real problem lies, to keep colleges and universities throughout Texas affordable for middle-class, working-class families. And we've lost sight of that in many ways, that higher education is meant to give young people a shot at getting ahead in our state and our country. And it shouldn't be an obsession with the U.S. News and World Report rankings, right? Although rankings are important, it shouldn't be the end-all be-all. And so what we can do in Texas to help is our state legislature needs to fund higher education. We need to invest in our colleges and universities, and we need to make sure that we have the best universities in the state, not in terms of prestige, but in terms of graduation rates, in terms of diversity, in terms of empowering students who normally wouldn't have a chance at higher education. If we change our way of thinking and the state steps up to fund those institutions, we can really help affordability, and we can make sure that every kid who works for it is able to get a higher education and get the opportunities they deserve.
Now, earlier, we had talked about the blue wave.
Sure.
We talked about, you want to see that pragmatic wave on both sides, but just beyond that, how important is it? I know in 150 races, Democrats are fielding 132 candidates in the Texas House races. How important is it to just, filling out the ballot, giving Texas Democrats a choice?
Yeah, or giving Texans a choice.
Give Texans a choice,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone deserves competitive, thoughtful, rigorous elections. I mean, that's the core of democracy. Right now, as you know, and as many of your listeners know, gerrymandering is a huge problem in Texas. There's actually an issue in front of the Supreme Court as we speak about how our maps look in Texas, and I know it's an issue in other states. And I'm just a big believer that voters should choose their leaders, and the leaders shouldn't choose their voters. And we have to create districts and maps that are fair and that give every Texan a fair voice in who represents them. Because that's the only way we're going to build really an active, aware citizenry across the state. Texas, and if you have any listeners outside of Texas, there's always this discussion of, is Texas a blue state? Is it going to flip? And I think what people really need to understand is that we are a non-voting state. Texans, I think have one of the lowest turnout percentages in the entire country, and that's because we don't have a culture of voting in Texas. And really, this is on both parties, because before the Republicans were in charge in Texas, Democrats were in charge. We're the state of Lyndon Johnson and Barbara Jordan and John Connolly and Ann Richards. Lloyd Bentsen. We were a Democratic state, and so there was not much competition then either. And then it really suddenly in the 80s, 90s became a Republican state. And there has been competition then since then. And so there have not been really competitive, thoughtful elections and fair districts drawn in Texas for a very long time. And that leads many Texans to not even bother voting, not even bother participating in the process. And that, is, in the end, is what's going to endanger our democracy. More than the Republican Party, more than the Democratic Party, it's going to be voter apathy. That is the thing we have to fight together.
And that's very interesting because, I saw a Texas Tribune study recently. I live in San Antonio, and I think about 6% of people voted in our last mayor election. Mm-hmm. And that was similar in cities across the state, Fort Worth, Austin. Yep. But just at the beginning of that answer, you did touch on gerrymandering.
Sure.
And I want to ask you how do you think issues like, gerrymandering and voter ID affect you in your upcoming election? Yeah,
we're fortunate in this district to have a pretty high percentage of voter registration. And that's because our district's a little more suburban, is slightly more affluent than other districts across the state. But we still have a problem with turnout because we haven't had competitive elections here in quite a while. And our district has been spared many of the worst gerrymandering that we've seen in other districts across the state. So we're fortunate that we have fairly drawn lines in this district, which is why what gives us a shot. We had a Democrat represent the seat, we had a Republican represent the seat. President Trump won this district by 1 point in 2016. So it's pretty 50-50 in this district. It was that close. Yeah, so this district is very winnable. It's one that that we plan on winning in November, and that we can really take this seat back. But that's not. I can't say that for other districts across the state. So we've got to find a way to take the partisanship, take the politics out of the redistricting process. And I'm hoping we can find a solution to that in the next session.
Yeah, certainly. And just before I let you go, I just wanted to give you that chance to make that final pitch to why our rant viewers and why people across Texas should vote for you in November.
Yeah, so people who live in my district, of course, I want to meet you and I want to get to know you personally and the issues you care about. And I hope that you can support a hometown guy who is trying to improve public education, give more health care to folks, and improve our roadways here. If you are outside of our district, you can still help. If you believe in putting people over party, if you believe in trying to move Texas forward, then you can help us in a couple ways. One, you can like our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Talarico for state rep. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at James Talarico. And you can sign up to volunteer. You can sign up to donate. Our campaign, unlike many state legislative campaigns, is driven by small donations. We had, in the last reporting period last year, we had 626 independent, unique donors giving to this campaign, mostly under $50. So please give whatever you can to the campaign. That's the only way we're going to make this vision of working together to improve our state a reality. So I really hope you'll join us, whether you live in House District 52 or whether you live in another part of Texas or another part of the country. And I hope you'll join us.
Yes, indeed. And like he said, you can find James on Twitter at James Talarico. If you want to follow Rant Media, you can click the top left of your screen. And if you are in the DFW area, come out to our House District 64 debate North Central Texas College, Saturday, April 28th. Thank you all for joining us. James?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, indeed.